Hey everybody. I'm really excited to be here and talking to you all this evening. Do we have a lot of folks from Stamford here tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody outside of Stamford? Cool. A couple. That's great. I'm going to dive right into this evening's talk about urban forests and their importance to Stamford, although this is applicable to those of you outside of Stamford as well. My name is Welker. Thank you so much. I don't know where you went for that really nice introduction. So I'm here to talk I'm here today from the State Urban Community Forestry Program, and I'm going to give this talk now. So I'm really excited to be co-presenting this evening with Erin McKenna from the city of Stamford. She's going to be talking at greater length about things that are happening here in the city with the planning of urban and community forestry. So I'm going to be kind of setting the stage and talking about what things kind of look like from the state perspective and the planning for our urban forests. We're going to start with a quick introduction of this kind of statewide program and the what we kind of do as the urban and community forestry program for the state. And then we'll get into the benefits of urban forests and the benefits that trees bring to our communities. Then I'll move into a little section all about how people kind of do urban forestry, because we talk about urban forestry a lot, but we don't get into the nuts and bolts of how it actually happens on the ground. And how we can make that more successful. And then I'll pass it off to Erin to take over from there. I do want to take a second to properly introduce myself. So I came to urban forestry through the realization that I love forests and trees, like I'm sure a lot of you here do. A lot of people come to urban forestry because they love trees and forests, and they also love to be where the people are. I, if you get to know me, am a little bit of an introvert, and so that wasn't my primary motivation, at least at first. I loved urban forests because of the benefits. I had an academic kind of book learning that urban forests are important because they bring us a lot of benefits. And so I got that book learning first at a community college in Massachusetts. I transferred to Yale University for my undergrad and then continued on into grad school there. And then while at grad school, I also worked with the Urban Resources Initiative and did youth tree planting. I'm there on the bottom right with my youth crew. They are holding like a gigantic stump that they dug out that day so that we could plant a shade tree. But actually the most impactful thing that I learned at Urban Resources Initiative wasn't through the tree planting program, although I enjoyed planting trees for people. It was when I was doing the street tree inventory with them, specifically in the low canopy neighborhoods. Because when you're out there and you're wearing a vest and you've got a clipboard and you're doing anything at all to trees, you're going to be the subject of a lot of questions and comments and exclamations. What are you doing to my tree? Are you going to take away my tree? Please, take away my tree. It was kind of jumping into the deep end as somebody who was very new to applied urban forestry. But it was so valuable for me to get that face time with communities. And so from there on, I really knew that the experience of working with communities to enrich and support their urban forest was going to continue to be a very important motivation for me. I've lived in a few places across the state, but I've always lived in an urban forest. And so this map here that I've included is a map of all of the urban forests in Connecticut. And you might look at this and be a little bit surprised because surely some of these places that I've highlighted are not that urban. But actually, if you look at census definitions of development density, they are urban. And actually, almost 90% of people in Connecticut live in an urban area. And they live in this collective urban forest with you and I. And so with so many people living in urban forests, it's really important to support their health of the forests and of the people living in them. So I'm fortunate to introduce myself to you again as the State Urban and Community Forestry Partnership Coordinator for the statewide Urban and Community Forestry Program. Our program is organized with these kind of two main tiers. So we have our financial assistance. Our financial assistance is a grant program. We make grants to certain organizations to support their urban forestry work. There's a couple of grantees in this room right now that I can recognize. And we also have assistance related to the administration and work associated with those projects. And then there's the technical assistance program, which I administer. I do want to clarify that while obviously a lot of our work is focused on the areas that I've highlighted on this map, we also do work outside of this. We are a statewide program. So even in a very small town, they probably still have a town green or some parks or a schoolyard that has trees. And so anywhere that a community is interacting with public trees, we're there to provide support and assistance and advice. So because urban forestry is a very cross-cutting discipline, we work with a lot of other groups within the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to do urban forestry work. So we are a very small program of just 2 people, but there are other groups within DEEP that are trying to support urban forestry work financially and with their own technical assistance programs. And so this can extend into things like stormwater management, general climate resilience, and open space access. And so these are a few of the other financial resources for doing urban forestry, or that at least can be applied to doing urban forestry. And on a similar note, there are a lot of partners and resources to learn more about urban forestry outside of the confines of what you can directly get from this talk or our program. I'll call out a few of them here, like the Connecticut Land Conservation Council are very invested in urban areas. The Nature Conservancy and our own advisory council, the Connecticut Urban Forest Council, are doing a set of peer learning exchanges over the next 18 months across Connecticut on the Council of Government scale. And so those will be directed at bringing stakeholders together to do like half-day workshops and networking. The Long Island Sound Resilience Resource Hub is also a really good source of information. And I'm just flagging your local tree warden is also a source of info. So we're going to move into the meat of the conversation now. So I want to acknowledge that the current condition and distribution of our urban forests, urban forests don't just exist where they are today. They exist because of what has existed in the past. And so one example of this is a practice called redlining. So if you're not familiar, redlining was an exclusionary practice of restricting investment into certain neighborhoods on the basis of who lived in those neighborhoods. Specifically, this is a map of Stamford that was drawn in 1932 or 1933, and certain neighborhoods were redlined, at least partially because more people who were Black or immigrants lived in those neighborhoods, and so they were not considered desirable to live in by mortgage insurers. And modern day analyses of redlining maps, I don't know about specifically Stamford's, but other redlining maps that were done in other cities look at these historic redlining maps and modern day canopy coverage, and have found that places that were redlined in the past have less canopy cover and less healthy trees than places that were not redlined in the past. And so, so that's just because of this legacy of less healthy trees, less canopy. We just have to keep those kinds of things in mind, because if that isn't actively corrected, those legacies of disinvestment can persist for a very long time, because trees grow on long time scales. In light of the discrepancy of lack of access to canopy, my program, the statewide program, is guided in part by Public Act 23206, which set a goal to increase canopy cover in specific identified low canopy environmental justice communities by 5% by 2040. And so those communities, I put them on a map of Connecticut just to share where they are. And then I've highlighted where those exist here in Stamford. But I could be getting ahead of myself, because I've talked a lot about urban forests and I'm talking about environmental justice communities, and I haven't actually defined what an urban forest is. But luckily, this is a very easy definition to make. It is all of the tree canopy that is in and around an urban area. So I like maps, and you're going to see a lot of maps in the next few slides. So this here is the boundaries of Stamford. And within Stamford, you have some natural areas These are not all of your natural areas, but this is the data that I had. These are state lands, state-owned lands. This is anything that kind of looks like what you would imagine a forest, like a proper forest, looks like. But you also have open areas with trees that might be a little bit more intentionally managed. These are trees that are planted or landscaped. And this could be a park, but it could also be a school or a cemetery or a baseball field. And of course, there are street trees and all of the trees that are in people's backyards and front yards, those that are on private property. From a landscape perspective, the way that managers need to think about and plan for all of these really different categories of trees varies a lot. So why urban forests? Why do we care about managing them? I don't think this is going to be a particularly tough crowd where you're like, we hate urban forests, so I'm glad for that. But there is sometimes a narrative that urban forests are not really forests, and it's like very difficult to manage them. It's hard to keep trees alive in a challenging environment, so why even bother? So I'm here to advocate for the trees. I'm the Lorax. A good starting point is getting into what the good things are that they bring into our lives. So there are kind of these three main categories that you often see the benefits of urban forests described by, and that's public health and safety, economic benefits, and the ecological benefits. I kind of have a different framework that I like to talk about the benefits of urban trees as, and that's kind of the way that trees are as living physiological beings, the way that they, as communities and as individuals, interact with our built environment and provide benefits through just existing in our environments, and then the way that we, as thinking and feeling and perceiving individuals, benefit from being in proximity to trees. So to start with the very essential benefits that we get from trees kind of doing their thing as trees in our environments, we need to have a very basic physiological knowledge of trees. Trees have leaves, we know this. Trees have roots. The roots go and they infiltrate the soil and they look for nutrients and water. And then they've got some other parts that are made out of wood that hold the leaves and the roots apart. And if we need anything more complicated than that, we'll get to it. So the leaves and the roots do some cool stuff when they're doing photosynthesis together. On a very hot day, they are photosynthesizing. They're also doing something called evapotranspiration. So evapotranspiration, trees are taking in oxygen, they're letting out CO2. They're also pulling water up out of the soil. They're bringing it up through their trunk, and they're letting it out through their leaves. And so what that's doing is they're taking liquid water and they're turning it into vapor. That's called a phase change, if you remember middle or high school chemistry. Mm-hmm. And that phase change takes energy. And so that's literally removing energy out of the air and using it to do that phase change of water. And so what that's doing is basically taking heat out of the air. It's cooling. It's directly cooling the air just through photosynthesizing. It makes things cooler. It also creates a small amount of wind, but you might not notice it. But trees are also creating shade. This is maybe more obvious, the way that trees cool things. This is really good for our comfort. This is really good for our AC bills. I love to share this photo that a colleague shared with me, although it's very blurry. She was picking up her daughter from a summer camp, and every single one of those kids is sitting under the one tree in that yard. You could tell it was a hot day. So cooling and shading are some of the most often thought of and maybe one of the most important direct benefits of trees in our urban areas, especially when you consider that heat stress is not felt equally by all members of our communities. We know that children and the elderly and the infirm are more likely to suffer from heat stress than a healthy and able-bodied adult. We also know that heat is not evenly distributed across a landscape. I've got this map here of Stamford, and so this is not showing heat, by Fahrenheit or Celsius or anything like that. It's just relative. So you can see that some parts of Stamford are just relatively more hot compared to other parts of Stamford. I also know that when I was a student and I was living in an apartment in an older building, we didn't have AC in that building. And we had these clunky window units, and we didn't want to run them all the time because it was pretty expensive to run them. And so some households just might not be able to run the AC adequately to cool their homes, especially during a heat wave. And so all of these factors come together, and the benefit that a tree provides by cooling a home, especially on a very hot day, becomes very significant. So we're going to move on from heat, and we're going to talk about air. So by existing and photosynthesizing in cities, trees are also helping to clean the air. They kind of have two different mechanisms that they're helping to clean the air through. So trees can directly uptake some very small molecules from things like car exhaust onto their leaves. They just directly absorb them and break them down. But their leaves also have very tiny structures on them. If you've ever looked at a leaf, even a pretty smooth one, you'll tell that it's not exactly smooth, right? It might have hairs on it or little structures. If you looked really close with a microscope, you might see them like this. And so those structures kind of act like a sponge to hold on to the pollutants that are in the air and trap them on the leaves. And it's a lot better for them to be trapped on the leaves of a tree than for be trapped in your lungs. And so this is kind of like a trait that managers and planners can think about when they are planting trees by a roadway, especially a busy roadway. Maybe they can plant species that are known to capture more of those polluting, polluting particles. So when it rains, when there's a heavy rain, some of those polluting particles will fall off of the leaves and get into the soil. And a lot of those polluting particles that didn't get onto tree leaves have already deposited onto roadways and building facades and things like that. And they all get into the water and get into what's called runoff. And so you get a lot of pollution in runoff. And it would have eventually ended up there if it didn't get into somebody's lungs. So when it rains in a developed area, all of this runoff ends up getting into storm drains, and it can eventually end up into rivers and wetlands and other sensitive ecosystems, even drinking water, which can be really problematic. It can cause things like eutrophication, which is when you get a nutrient overload in a sensitive ecosystem. And so trees can do a couple of things that reduce the amount of pollutants that are in runoff. So trees have very strong roots. We know that this can be problematic sometimes if you don't plant the right tree in the right place. Like, it can push up your pavers or your sidewalks and things like that. But this also means that roots work really well with soil to create more space in the soil for soil to absorb water. And trees are great, I love trees, but soil is really the most valuable player when it comes to absorbing water when it rains. And so trees work with soil to accept rainwater. So rainwater that has pollutants percolates down. And oh my gosh, that sounds kind of bad, right? Because now we have pollutants that are getting into the soil. But actually, when you look at what these pollutants are, particularly pollutants from car exhaust, a lot of them are phosphorus and nitrogen containing compounds. And trees use those as kind of like fertilizer. People will buy nitrogen and phosphorus compounds to sprinkle intentionally on their lawns to make them grow more lush and green. And so trees can actually absorb between 50 and 80% of the pollutants that are in stormwater runoff. Now, when there's a heavy rain, trees and their leaves also are a physical barrier to rain even getting to the ground. So they hold some rain on their surfaces. So you can imagine that, rain is falling from the sky, it hits the leaf, it stays there for a little while. It eventually gets down to the ground. Depending on the species of tree, it can be half of a centimeter of rain. It might be less than that. It could be 1/10 of a centimeter of rain. So across a single tree, that might be 6 gallons or 12 gallons of rainwater that never even gets to the bottom. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but across an entire city's tree canopy, that could be hundreds of thousands or millions of gallons of stormwater that is diverted from the stormwater systems. And then even after its capacity to hold rainwater is filled up, it still slows and reduces the peak at which rain is falling underneath it. And so this is really important because when you think about things like flooding, flooding happens when our capacity to deal with stormwater, or at least one kind of flooding can happen, when our capacity to deal with stormwater is filled up. And so when our natural infrastructure, like our soils, are fully saturated, and our built infrastructure, like our storm drains and sewers, are full of stormwater and can't take anymore, then you start to get flooding because those things are backed up. So trees are slowing the amount of rain that gets into our storm systems. And so that can be a really important benefit if you have enough trees planted. And then this is the benefit that probably most people are familiar with. There's a lot of things that live on and in trees, you know, migrating birds, pollinators, fungi, lots of things like that. As a person who did research on underground nitrogen cycling, I have to give a little shout out to the mycorrhizal fungi, which are the ones that associate with the roots. If you've ever read Finding the Mother Tree, you know, that's what they talk about in that one. So yeah, there's just a whole world underground and above ground that relies on trees. Up to 20% of the world's bird biodiversity can use urban forests as habitat. So I hope that after that section, you've gotten a little bit of an understanding for how the benefits that trees are giving us just through kind of how, for being trees in our environment. But we also get benefits from you know, our own mental state and our own health from being in proximity to trees. And you might kind of intuitively understand these already. Like after a stressful day, you might go out, you know, walk in the park and just feel better. Trees have these kind of relaxing effects on us. And there's even been studies looking at things like hospital, you know, if somebody can see a tree through their hospital window, they recover from surgery faster and can go home more quickly. Reduced effects of ADHD, you know, less symptom severity if they spend more time in green space. And so there's been a lot of studies about this kind of thing. It's a little bit hard to disentangle mechanisms because people and their health and psychology are pretty complicated. But there is a pretty clear trend that places that have more trees and more green space have people who have better and longer lifespans. There is a really great study that was done in Louisville that I do want to shout out. And so this was a study that was done by an organization called Greenheart. And what they did was they took a set of baseline measurements, blood measurements from two neighborhoods that were either adjacent to each other or otherwise very similar to each other. And what they were testing for were a set of blood markers that are really good predictors of things like heart disease, heart attack, and certain types of cancer. And then after they took the baseline measurement, they did a really intensive tree planting campaign in one of those neighborhoods, but not the other. And then after the tree planting campaign, they did a second set of measurements, and they found that in the neighborhood where they did that tree planting campaign, they had much better measurement of those markers. And it was a pretty, if I recall correctly, it was a pretty short period of time after the tree planting campaign took place. So again, this isn't uncovering a specific mechanism. I think there needs to be more research into those types of things, but it is a very interesting study to look towards in how trees are affecting even our cardiovascular health. And so because trees are just providing such high level of benefits to so many different areas of our lives, they should be integrated into and considered a part of our infrastructure. But unlike most parts of our infrastructure, our built infrastructure, it is a living system that grows and changes. Okay, so I'll sum up really quick. We know that there are areas that have more tree canopy than others. It's not evenly distributed across the city of Stamford. It's not evenly distributed across the state of Connecticut. We know that healthy and abundant urban forest cover is really important for a whole litany of reasons. And so from these two things, it becomes really clear that communities need to have good tools and practices for managing their urban forests. So I know that Erin, after me, is going to have a lot more to say about the specifics of planning related to urban forestry happening here in Stamford. So I just wanted to kind of have a quick chat, I say quick, it's maybe half my presentation, about successful some of the foundational ideas that guide successful urban forestry. So I want to preface this by saying that I'm really scraping the surface. This could easily be a college course or a dissertation or something. But because urban forests are a part of the infrastructure that we interact with probably every day, most of us, I do think it's worthwhile to share a high-level explanation of what managers are working with and towards when we talk about doing urban forestry. So in our experience as a state program, we've seen that there are a few key components to a strong urban forestry program. Having enough capacity to do urban forestry work, having robust planning so that you're working in the right direction, and then having clear standards and adequate enforcement of those standards so that everybody is kind of on the same page. So in these next section, I'm going to talk about each of these things a little bit more and point to a couple of examples of how these look in different urban forestry programs across the state. So even though I kind of listed those before, these are really all interdependent on each other. This might look kind of academic, and you don't need to be taking any kind of notes, I promise. There's basically just a circular process here of, we need to make good plans, and these plans should be informed by consistent, high-quality standards. But we can't follow those plans if we don't have the capacity and resources and staff to follow through on those plans, and we really shouldn't set standards that we will regularly exceed our ability to enforce. And so we need to increase our capacity, and that's going to require some planning, and that should be with respect to good standards, and so you can get kind of stuck in a spiral there before you actually ever plant a tree. And so this is going to sound maybe a little trite, maybe a little cheesy, but you're going to notice that there's something missing in the middle, and that's community engagement. And community engagement might be able to get you out of that circle. Incorporating community needs and values is a critical part of urban forestry. That's why we're called the Urban and Community Forestry Program. So urban and urban forestry programs should be by and for communities as much as they are for trees. So let's discuss capacity. This can be a little bit of a buzzword in my program. We're always talking about how we want to increase capacity in the partners that we work with. So when we say capacity, what we're really referring to is the ability to successfully implement the programming that you've planned for or the standards that you've set for yourself. These are things like staff or funding or equipment or knowledge and know-how to do what you've set out to do. I'm going to touch on a few of the important kind of agents or actors in capacity in the urban forestry program. So we can do a quick little show of hands here. Who knows who the Stamford tree warden is? That is way more than I thought. Okay, wow. That might make my next question meaningless, but who knows what a tree warden is? Okay, a lot of repeats, good. Okay, for my job and for urban forestry, this person could be more important than the mayor. My apologies if any current or former mayors are in attendance. So Connecticut is pretty unique because it's a law that every municipality in the state needs to have a tree warden. And so the tree warden is the person who has care and control of public trees as well as shrubs. And so this means that they are the person who is responsible for planting trees as well as removing trees in public spaces. They need to ensure public safety related to trees, and they hold public hearings if the public objects to a tree being removed. Most of the time, a tree warden needs to be almost exclusively focused on public safety related to trees. I've really gassed up trees in this presentation, for good reason. Trees are important, but the benefits that we get from trees are really contingent on them receiving good care and on being pruned or removed before they become a public danger. So, here I've shown a couple of examples. This is a tree that has been hit by a car at some point in the past and has now, some of its bark has come off. It's probably already has gotten some kind of fungal infection and is dying back. That tree is going to become a public hazard at some point in the future. And then here's a tree where it wasn't realized that was a hazard. It fell down right next to a playground, and that could have very easily become, a tragedy. And so things like that are where the tree warden is just performing a very, very crucial task. And this is a substantial workload. They're covering an entire municipality and all of the public trees. But actually, just under half of Connecticut tree wardens report something like tree warden as their primary title or like their first duty. And so, generally speaking, larger cities like New Haven and Hartford will have something like an urban forester or like a tree coordinator. But in many municipalities, the state requirement to have a tree warden falls to the leader of, like the head of public works or a highway foreman, and in a handful of towns, it will be the mayor or the first selectman who is also performing those tree warden duties. So when the tree warden is a public servant who has a lot of other, competing responsibilities, there can be relatively little capacity to grow and support a larger forestry program. So this is where a collective group like a tree commission can come in. Tree commissions in Connecticut are generally boards of passionate and knowledgeable people. Maybe some of you in here serve on a tree board. And so they volunteer or are appointed to support tree-related activities in their town or their city. So they can have a scope of work which really extends beyond the public safety scope that a tree warden often focuses on. So the exact role and the composition of a tree commission can vary quite a bit. In my town, the tree commission is 5 people. Most of our meetings have 5 people at them. Sometimes there's some town staff or the tree warden will drop by. And what they do is they go out and they scout for places to plant trees. They apply for grants to extend their capacity. They also do public outreach and put together materials for public outreach. Whereas in a big city like Hartford, Hartford has what they call a tree advisory council. And their tree advisory council has huge meetings every month where they have like this core advisory board. They have the city urban forester. Sometimes they have members from other parts of the city join, and they often have folks from different nonprofits speaking as well. And that makes sense because Hartford has a really bustling urban forestry scene. There's a lot of activity happening, and so it makes sense for them to have these large meetings for everybody to coordinate and understand what's happening, and not step on each other's toes too much. We have kind of on the other end of the spectrum. I had the pleasure of visiting Woodbury recently, which is a very small town. And they don't have a tree commission at all. Most communities, I think, in Connecticut don't have a tree commission. But Woodbury doesn't have a tree commission. They do have a sidewalk commission. And their sidewalk commission was like, we want to increase our capacity to do tree things somewhat. And so I joined them for a meeting. And they ended up applying for a grant through our program. And they do a lot of outreach related to trees. So they're still increasing the capacity of their town's tree program. We've observed that tree commissions or similar boards are generally such a good indicator of a successful urban forestry program that we've included them as a metric for the Sustainable Connecticut accreditation. So Sustainable Connecticut is a award that municipalities can apply for to basically say, like, this is what we're doing to be sustainable. And so for action 3.9, which is urban forestry, we've included tree commissions just because they're so important. Now, to talk about other partners, many of the most successful urban forestry programs have external partners that they work with as well. Like I mentioned before, urban forestry programs should be really grounded in community engagement, and external partners can have like the closest view of what is important to a community, like I mentioned earlier in response to that question. There are a lot of examples of green space or urban forestry focused programs that exist in cities across Connecticut. Things like New London Trees in New London, Groundwork Bridgeport in Bridgeport, and the Urban Resources Initiative in New Haven, whom I worked with when I was a graduate student. But these external partners don't need to be urban forestry focused. One great example is the Afro-Caribbean Cultural Center in Waterbury. They hosted a workshop that we held with that we co-held with UConn last spring, and they were instrumental in helping us get good turnout for this workshop because they knew the neighborhood and they knew the community, and we had really good turnout to that workshop because we were holding it at their center and they had good contacts. Other examples are things like housing advocacy groups, even neighborhood revitalization zones. They are so important for increasing capacity and for communicating the community's needs to decision makers and to planners. And now funding, because this is what most people, I think of when they talk about capacity. It's a very direct measure. So here in Stamford, you've been considered what is a tree city for 37 years. So that's great. Tree City is an award from the Arbor Day Foundation, and one of the qualifications to be a tree city is that you spend at least $2 per capita towards your urban forestry programming, or at least towards your public tree programming. And $2 per capita is not actually that much. In most of our municipalities in Connecticut, that might just pay for the tree warden's salary, or it might just pay for tree removals, because that is a part of urban forestry maintenance. So a lot of urban forestry programs will end up spending more than this baseline, but it is a start. So now that we have discussed capacity, I wanted to share with you a few examples of the goals and planning that we've seen from some communities across the state. So in Hartford, for instance, they adopted a canopy action plan. So they set up 14 sub-actions to increase their urban canopy by 10% over the next 50 years. Whereas in Norwalk, they last year adopted a tree master plan to plant 63,000 trees over the next 30 years. That's a huge number. They have a really cute tagline for that one of 53% cover by 2053. And I wanted to call out both of these specifically because they specifically highlight community engagement as a core component of their plans. If you remember this picture that I showed you 20 minutes ago of the urban forest canopy, a lot of the current canopy or opportunities for expansion are not, in rights of way or in public parks. They are on private property. And so we've seen that in this recent urban forestry planning in Hartford and in Norwalk, they're really focusing on ensuring that homeowners have access to good information about the benefits of trees, how to care for their mature trees, and then even offering things like tree plantings and tree giveaways to private property owners in order to increase the canopy in those areas. I know, again, that Erin is going to have a lot more to say on the subject of planning, so I'm going to give just a little bit of a teaser and say that they also both heavily refer, both Hartford and Norwalk heavily refer to their tree inventories. This is not either of their inventories. This is an inventory of 32,000 street trees in New Haven. But a tree inventory is essentially a record of information about trees in a given area. And so tree inventories can help managers keep track of things like the distribution of trees, like what kinds of trees there are, how big they are, their health over time. And so this can help them track their goals and progress towards goals, like how many trees are planted in a given area, how many trees are native in a given area or invasive, and how healthy they are. I know that in New Haven, the tree warden even uses their tree inventory to track the outcome from public hearings related to tree removals. And so that brings us finally to standards and enforcement. And there are multiple ways that a community can establish standards related to their urban forests. For the purposes of today's talk, I'm not going to talk about a whole lot of them because I've been talking for a little while, but there are things like zoning regulations, and I think that Erin's going to talk to those quite a bit more. So I'm just going to talk about tree ordinances. A tree ordinance is a local law that can help to codify specific procedures or standards when it comes to how trees are managed across a landscape. So these can start out pretty basic. Where I live, the tree ordinance is basically like, we like trees. We are going to commit to planting one tree for every tree that we remove. And we're not going to remove trees for putting in solar panels or if somebody wants to have a driveway. And that's something, it does protect some private trees. They also commit to specific best practices and protection of the critical root zone during routine maintenance. But there are additional components to that can be considered as a part of an ordinance. And so they can be quite a bit more complex than one which only covers public trees, like the one in my town. So that one only discusses public trees, but for instance in Hartford, their ordinance also talks about private trees. So in Hartford, if you want to remove a tree in your backyard that is large enough, you need to get a permit from the city forester. And so the process for that is the city forester will come out to assess your tree to discuss if it is a danger to your home. And so the city forester is an arborist, and she'll do an assessment of your tree and discuss your concerns with you. And then when the tree is removed, you have to pay into what's called a tree fund, or you have to replace the trees yourself. And it's not a one-to-one replacement like in Hamden for their public trees. It's a replacement based on the inches of a tree that you're removing. So it is meant to, it's based around the idea that removing a large tree has more of an impact than planting one small tree. So their ordinance, while it is much more complex, it establishes a tree fund, it calls for creating the master plan that I discussed earlier, ultimately does protect more trees than the first one. Ordinances and other standards that I don't have the time to get into, like the zoning regulations, are all different tools in a toolbox to move plans to implementation. So we can put things all together now. I hope that you have a little bit more of an appreciation for the importance of urban forests and their value to the places that we live, as well as the complicated but really critical task of developing and growing a strong urban forestry program. I really just barely scratched the surface, but through strong planning, clear standards, and strong community engagement, all throughout, any community can bring urban forestry from paper to practice. I wanted to finish this out with a quote that I really like that I stole from Norwalk's Tree Action Plan from James R. Clark and his paper, A Model of Urban Forest Sustainability. Urban trees and forests are considered integral to the sustainability of cities as a whole. Yet sustainable urban forests are not born, they are made. They do not arise at random, but result from a community-wide commitment to their creation and management. So let's all commit to some sustainable urban forests together. I'm happy to take more questions now. I would also love to hear your feedback, so please let me know what you thought, what worked for you, what didn't. This is my first time running this specific presentation. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for having me tonight to say a few words about what the city is doing to improve the city's tree resource. Oh, you're going to switch the slides for me? So Les went over these points, like why are urban trees important? Energy conservation, trees that shelter buildings reduce cooling and heating costs, stormwater runoff. In the city, we have significant flooding in Stamford, and trees are vital to flood mitigation. For instance, on the driveway in here, there are, it's lined with there's yellow wood trees. They're medium-sized, and a medium-sized tree like one of those intercepts about 2,400 gallons of water annually. So, 12 to 13 of those trees can intercept the volume of a large backyard pool in a year. That's about 30,000 gallons of water. So that's a lot. And property values. Trees improve property values. They change the entire character and feel of a city street. And I'll take the next slide, please. Whenever developers come into our offices, they always fill their renderings with trees so that they look exciting and vibrant. So, if you look at that and imagine it without the trees, it's like great big battleships by itself. And so we don't want that. Trees, of course, support wildlife, and they're beautiful. I took this picture a couple days ago on my way to the train. It's right on Washington Boulevard, in front of WWE. It's a swamp white oak. It's the same tree as that's in Columbus Park, the most beautiful tree in Stamford. But we do not always treat our trees, especially our street trees, respectfully. My former boss, Robin Stein, you gave me this 10 years ago. And it's still true today. I'm sure you recognize all those street tree pruning styles. Next, please. So, as Melanie was describing, in 2010, the Land Use Bureau began requesting tree funds to do a citywide tree inventory. Until 2021, when a citizen named Melanie Hollis came along, she organized an appeal to the city boards that resulted finally in us getting the money. So she demurred. She sort of said, oh, yeah, the city funded it finally. Well, it really wasn't because we needed her help. And, we do our jobs as civil servants, but we really, really need the voice of citizens to guide and support us. And there's so many mighty citizens in the room tonight. There's Michelle, there's Jessie, there's Linda, there's Beth, there's Christy, there's Robin, there's Deanna. You're everywhere, and we really need your help, and I'm glad you're here. So I'm gonna have a little sip of water, excuse me. Our citywide tree inventory was completed last year at a cost of $208,000. The data are in a program called Tree Keeper, and the inventory includes the location of every tree within the city right-of-way, as Melanie said, and loads of additional data, which we're going to see. We inventoried about 26,000 trees altogether. This does not count trees within parks or schools, but we're going to be working next on inventorying the park trees. So this is the remote data capture system that we use to create the Stamford tree inventory. It's kind of like, it's attached to a specialized vehicle. It's about 10 feet tall. And it's kind of like a Google Maps car, but bigger. The red thing on the top there is a high resolution camera that takes 5 images of each tree. And then surrounded by LiDAR sensors that we were just talking about. So for each tree, the inventory includes location and species. This is a pin oak. The size, it shows how high it is, how wide it is, what the diameter of the trunk is, the condition, the high resolution photos, and proximity to utility lines, which is coming up soon. And it also makes digital twins of the tree. So this is an overlay of a digital tree on the photo of a tree. So you can look at it like that, or you could look at the digital twin by itself, turn it around and look at it from all angles. Or you can just look at the photos of the tree from different angles, like you can on Google Street, pretty much, The inventory allows you to do a lot remotely. You can look at all of these characteristics without visiting the tree in real life. And an inventory provides a basis for managing and planting. So, for instance, ash trees everywhere, but in Stamford, have been attacked by the deadly emerald ash borer, and beech trees are subject to beech leaf disease. So the inventory enables us to make a map of the locations of all just ash and beech trees in the city right-of-way, so that we can plot a strategy for removals and replanting. And then, like you saw in Les's, it also can show you where the density of the trees is, and where all the maples are, and there's just a lot of flexibility in what kind of data you can derive from this inventory. So here's another example of what it can do. It shows the urban forester that we will have coming on working for the city pretty soon will be able to identify dieback and during a remote inspection and choose to either go out and inspect it themselves or to make other management decisions. This shows where the tree does not meet the minimum clearance for the utility lines, which is determined per voltage, so bigger for higher voltage, I guess. And then the next slide, this is another view or way of seeing the utility clearance required. This information can be the basis of a cost-sharing plan with the utility. We could use it to determine which ones really need to be trimmed and hopefully reduce over-pruning, which you've all seen deformed trees that have been over, yeah, right. It indicates where the critical root zone is. And the next one. So contractors can sometimes have a difficult time understanding the tree protection requirements. And these images make it clear. This orange circle is the critical root zone. So that's where it has to be protected from impaction, from heavy stuff being like just stored on it. And it shows the limits of excavation. So if you encroach on that, you're likely to harm the tree, structurally or health-wise. Yeah, this red zone here is the area of water uptake. So you can see how big it is for a tree. So this inventory allows you to take the leaves off the tree so you can see the structure, the branch structure. And we can go to the next one. So if we periodically re-inventory the trees every 5 to 10 years, we can truly monitor the change over time. So this is a tree from a preliminary inventory, and then the next one, this is the same tree inventoried a few years later. The green is the crown from the previous scan, and then the purple shows the growth captured in the rescan. So what other things is the city doing besides establishing this tree inventory? Well, we established the urban forester position, so which is being advertised now, so we should have someone within the next couple months. And so that means there will be someone here dedicated to the management of street trees alone. And, well, city trees, but most of them are street trees. And also managing the tree inventory. We have a $1 million grant to plant street trees and park trees in the neighborhoods that need them the most. We'll be planting trees and parks this spring, and the urban forester will be able to manage planting the street trees in the fall. So we do have a tree ordinance which was recently updated to further regulate removals, kind of along the lines of the Hartford example that Les was providing. And the mayor vetoed it. But once an urban forester is in place, the administration might find it more feasible to enact the updated ordinance. I mean, the ordinance required that we establish an urban forester, and we are doing that. So some of it's on its way. It's not over yet. It's not over till it's over.
The ordinance is working even though it's not.
It's kind of going. With regard to zoning, the Land Use Bureau, which is where I work, I didn't do this. My boss, Ralph Blessing, did this. He has worked on updating the zoning regulations to increase street tree planting. For instance, when development involves redoing a sidewalk, per zoning, there will be a tree planted every 25 feet. If not physically possible, there will be a fee in lieu paid for each tree not planted of $2,500. And this goes into a tree planting account. And so far, I guess this was enacted like 2 years ago, and we've collected, I don't know, $40,000, something like that. It's not a terrific amount of money, but it's, something. And these regulations are linked to, zoning also requires that tree islands, and we didn't have this requirement before, that tree islands in large parking lots need to be installed, one for every 10 parking spaces. So you'll see that at Cummings. So Cummings didn't have any trees in the parking lot, and we're redoing the parking lots there, and they will now have trees and tree islands. So the regulations are linked to the Stamford Street Tree Manual, which prescribes how street trees need to be planted. And here is this is included in the manual as a species list. And the highlighted ones are the natives. And why are they highlighted? Because Melanie asked us to. That was her. Speaking of someone who has her eyes on everything. And the next one is just it's a diagram that shows the spacing considerations for street trees and the much larger pits now. So I would say that the most significant improvement that the street tree manual has brought to us is the requirement to make tree pits as large as possible, up to 10 feet by 4 feet, which is, you see trees in 2 by 2 pits in some places. So they have a better chance of surviving.
So I think that concludes. We're a little bit over time, but we want to thank all of you for coming. Hope you learned something. And we hope that you could come to the next session on February 25th. It's a Wednesday, 6 p.m., and it will be in this same room.
That sounds really exciting.